Hello, this is the second video on home earthquake vulnerabilities, and I decided to film this in a crawl space where I can show you what a cripple wall is. This video is about weak cripple walls. Cripple walls are a significant vulnerability for houses in earthquakes. And this is a newer home, so the cripple wall on the exterior here is already strong. I don't have to worry about retrofitting it, but I can show you how you would retrofit this if this were an older home. And fortunately in this crawl space I can stand up. So made it a nice one to work in. My name is BJ Cure. I am a structural and earthquake engineer in the Portland, Oregon area. So in the first video we talked about how damage to houses in earthquakes typically and often occurs below the first floor level. So here I am below the first floor. This is the first frame floor with a pretty deep crawl space. And earthquake damage likes to focus down below the first floor. And many houses don't have a cripple wall. That means the concrete foundation would come all the way up and the first floor framing would be sitting directly on the concrete foundation. But a cripple wall is where you have a wood framed wall between the concrete foundation. I can tilt the camera down a little bit here. And you can kind of see the concrete foundation down there. There's some vent holes, and then this fairly tall cripple wall, about 4 or 5 feet tall, up in this area where the cripple wall or the joist framing, floor framing is sitting on the cripple wall. So they're in this vulnerable area below the first frame floor. Above the first frame floor, the seismic forces are less, but you also have a lot more walls and sheathing. You know, even the exterior walls have interior sheathing. All of that sheathing and all those walls help resist seismic forces, which just statistically makes these cripple walls, where you only have exterior sheathing, a particular vulnerability. And in older houses, cripple walls often are particularly weak. So generally speaking, before the 1950s, cripple walls were constructed of straight sheathing, like 1x sheathing. And that's very weak in earthquakes. I mean, it's like something along the lines of 10 times weaker than a well-nailed plywood system, or OSB, oriented strand board, which isn't quite as good as plywood, but it's way better than the 1x straight sheathing. Between the 1950s and 1990s, you see all sorts of things, and sometimes you can have adequate anchorage, but you could have plywood or something similar to plywood, like T111, and just weakly nailed or stapled, and not stapled all the way around or nailed all the way around the perimeter of each panel, and that creates a vulnerability. Houses have failed because of lack of nailing in plywood or similar materials. And then mid to late 1990s and newer, you can generally count on a house having a strong enough cripple wall. Here's a photo that demonstrates what can happen to a home with a weak cripple wall. And you can see how the home dropped a few feet, slid off the foundation as well. The porch kind of brought the porch with it, and it just mangled up the house so much. And whenever this happens, this kind of damage happens, the house is typically a complete loss economically. You can't be in it after an earthquake. So it's a big deal, and it's a huge benefit to strengthen a weak cripple wall and provide the anchorage. So for retrofitting a weak cripple wall, engineering can be useful, especially for complicated homes and tall cripple walls and situations like that. But it can be done by seismic retrofit contractors without engineering assistance. And if you're savvy enough, you could do it yourself. And below this video, I'm attaching a link that you can go to that is a prescriptive plan set about how you can retrofit a house with a weak cripple wall or a house that lacks foundation anchorage. But you need to be careful doing it yourself, because the entire seismic load path has to be completed, has to be done right. If you miss any one part of the load path, you can have a weak link there, and the house can still slide on that location. So how do you retrofit a house with a weak cripple wall? Well, typically you come from the inside, and you put plywood sheathing on the inside. That's typically the easiest way to do it. You don't have to mess with the siding. Contractors that do this regularly are used to getting in crawl spaces and fitting the plywood. And, you know, it would come all the way up to this, what's called the double top plate of the cripple wall, and all the way down to the sill plate down below, where the mud cell sits on the concrete. and it would be well nailed to all the studs as well as the top and bottom. And you can sometimes supplement existing sheathing if you have some plywood, or you feel like maybe the plywood's not strong enough, but you can also just fully sheathe the entire interior. I wanted to say a retrofit should not focus on interior posts. The stiffness of the exterior walls is so far greater than the post. All the seismic load wants to suck into the exterior cripple walls. That's the area you want to strengthen. So again, you have to complete the entire load path. I'm attaching a kind of a sample detail of how a typical piece of plywood is applied to the interior side of a crawl space. You have to have clips from the rim joist to the double top plate here, and then the load path has to be connected from the double top plate through the plywood and the nailing all the way down to the mud sill, and then the either retrofitted anchorage or existing anchors if they're sufficient to complete the load path into the foundation. And again, the foundation has to be strong enough, so there's a lot to think about. You want to make sure you have every part of the load path complete from that first floor down to the foundation, and then the foundation is going to actually hold when the earthquake loads go into it. So retrofitting plywood cripple wall significantly reduces the seismic risk of a house, and might be the best bang for your buck out of any retrofitting measure that can be done. So I hope this video is helpful. Feel free to leave any questions or comments, and I'd be happy to answer them. And thanks for watching.